Glad to have the opportunity to speak in this context of this very interesting program. And I want to emphasize that English is not my language. This isn't far off perfect English, so sometimes there may be some hesitation, is this or that word correct? It is the first time for me to hold a lecture about this issue in English language, which is videotaped, and eventually it will be brought into internet. So I am quite curious how it will develop. Okay, the world financial crisis is in discussion worldwide since 2008, when it escalated, and all the time afterwards. But my impression is that most of the discussions and most of the political means which have been taken against this crisis have got stuck on some kind of a surface. These discussions in politics as well as in economic science and in the media did not really go and focus on the deeper roots of the financial crisis. And just this is what I would like to develop in this context today. One can say afterwards everybody is more wise than before, but I can say that already in my publication from 1996, which is called Der Nebel das Geld, the fog around the money, I developed some thoughts in this context which showed that the economic system worldwide, on the basis of the monetary system, has a tendency to several kinds of crises, and that these crises will be more and more heavy, will become more and more heavy. And over many years it was not so much public interest in the thesis which I developed and published and also held in my lectures. But since 2008, this interest in this quite unconventional view growed amazingly. Meanwhile, I'm some kind of an internet star in German language, because my videos about world financial crisis, they are visited very often, 100,000 times one of these videos, which is quite a lot. It is not so much compared with the numbers in television stations and programs, but it is much more than I reached relating to public interest in the years before. So this is now a new step to try for me to express it in English, and maybe if it's brought into internet, to reach an English-speaking and English-understanding audience. Okay, I will start with the title and with this picture on this book, which I will paint with some very rough graph. There is the money. I have now to change the German words into English, so this means money. Usually it is G for Geld. So now this money is associated with positive thoughts and feelings. It is the sun, and if the sun is shining in our countries, usually we feel better than if it's raining and storming. So this is a symbol. The money, in its function for an economy, has very important aspects, and it is very important that the money, the flow of money in the circulation, is functioning, and if this flow of money is fundamentally disturbed, then the consequences can be very hard. It will lead into economic crisis, social crisis, political crisis. We had in the history of the 20th century even situations where all these crises then prepared the ground for fascism in Germany, for example. So a functioning monetary system is very essential for the functioning of economy and society. And therefore it is important to emphasize the meaning of money for this economic system and circulation of goods and services. But there is a link between money and interest. This I means now interest. Maybe I should do it like this. Interest is linked with money, and everybody thinks that it must be like this. You get interest if you lend your money to another person or institution, to a bank, and then you get interest. This seems to be a fine thing. On the other hand, those persons or corporations or even the state who takes a credit has to pay interest. And not only to repay the sum of credit, but over the years, each year, there is a service of debt where the interest on the specific sum has to be paid. So this seems to be some kind of natural. It all the time was like this, and it is now like this, and nearly nobody can imagine that it may become different, that money could function without interest. And usually, although not only this question is not even put, because why should it be changed? There is no widespread consciousness about a very fundamental problem which is rooted in this link of money and interest. My thesis is, and this is in this picture here shown, that at least 5 crisis tendencies develop out of this link of money and interest. This is the crisis of economy, economic crisis. This is the crisis of environment. This is the crisis of society. Here it is meant in the sense of growing polarization of society between the poor and the rich, and this is not only an economic aspect, it is a social tension. And in a society where these tensions grow, there's also the tendency that some violence may break out, and the development may run out of control, which history shows different examples for this. So then there is the crisis of the state, and specifically the state budget. And then all these crisis symptoms in the third world specifically, and more also in parts of the so-called second world, the former socialistic systems which were transformed into market economies, and several of these countries get more and more involved also now in these crisis tendencies which are mentioned already here. Well, it's at first glance difficult to imagine how this and that may be connected. And in fact, there is a widespread unconsciousness, a widespread, as I call it, fog around this connection. And this fog around the money, or the fog around the interest, I painted symbolically like this. So meanwhile, nobody can really neglect or ignore that these crisis tendencies really exist, and also that these crisis tendencies escalate during the last years and 1 or 2 decades, but especially since 2008 with the escalation of the world financial crisis. One cannot ignore that there are fundamentally problems. The more it is amazing that the connection between these crisis symptoms and between these deeper roots, these are nearly not discussed in most levels in policy, in the media, and in economic science. Meanwhile, there are a few persons and scientists and engaged people who brought it into the discussion, and it spreads. And this occasion today is another event of this kind, and let's hope, or I hope, that it may be some opportunity to look deeper into the problems as it usually is done. Well, why should the interest be a problem? I turn this all around, this blackboard or brown board or wall. And now comes another brick in the wall. Yeah? Let's think about the dynamics of interest over some period of several decades. The problems only show after a period of several decades, not in the short run, in the long run. And this may be the time, let's say 15, 30, 45, 60, 75 years. I choose this period by reason of a specific aspect which I will develop. And here I choose, this will be in euro or in dollar, 16 times. So what happens with an amount of money if it's put onto a bank account and leading to an interest for the creditor, for this person or institution which gives the money to the bank. Wait a short minute. I share it with 16 into the half, 8, 4, 2, 1. We start with 1 euro. This also can be 1 billion euro in the bigger context. It's only an example. And I ask, what will happen with this 1 euro or dollar or whatever over these decades if there is an interest rate of 5%? Only an example. And it is not difficult with a small machine. Where do I have it? Here. I suppose everybody of you has it in the pocket, or in the computer there's also possibilities. And there is one formula which is called the compound interest formula, which means that €1 is leading in 1 year to an interest income of 5 euro cent. And now you can decide what will you do with this interest income, with this 5 euro cent. Will you take it away and consume it, for example, or will you put it additionally onto the sum and add it to the sum of this €1? These are the two alternatives, the two extremes, and I now choose the one extreme, that all the interest income is added to the sum of the starting euro and the growing amount of it. So this is what we call, or what is called, compound interest. Interest on interest. By the way, it is interesting that in English the interest has this word, interest. It is different in German. There's no such amazing phenomenon. But in English we really could ask, who has interest in interest? And this I hope to work out in this lecture as far as possible in a limited time. It is really interesting. And I hope I will awake or enforce your interest in the background and in the deeper roots and in the consequences of interest system, and not only out of the perspective of an individual creditor or debitor, but out of the bigger context of an economy, of national economy, or even wider of a world economy. And I myself, I studied economics a long time ago, as you can imagine. I heard a lot and read a lot about the role of interest in economic system and in market economy, and it all sounded that it is a very positive and very important part of this market economy. And it took me decades to come onto tracks of thoughts and of insights and of questions at first about the more negative and dramatic, really dramatic aspects of a compound interest system in the whole, in the world economy and world financial system. So I choose this example as one of simple possibility. If you take this example, the formula is very simple. You can take this €1 and with 5% you add here in this formula 5 cents. I do not want to paint the mathematic formula, but to think it through and put it into such a machine, you really only need to do this. And then, with an exponent, and this exponent is the time over which this credit runs. And with this example here, 5%, it is nearly, not exactly, but nearly 15 years that this original amount by compound interest will double. So, €1 with all this compound interest will develop to €2 in around 15 years. It's not exactly, but I take it very roughly to illustrate it. The next 15 years again a double effect. So these are 1 get 2, 2 get 4, 4 get 8 in the next 15 years, and 8 will get again a doubling. 8 will get or become 16. So I paint this line which connects the points. And there 60 years. Let's take 75. Then again this amount has to double, and then we reach the limits of this room and go over or beyond the limit of this board. I only show the tendency. The next 15 years, even more. This is an effect which is called in mathematics positive Rückkopplung. Positive. No. It's an exponential function. It's an exponential function which leads to an ever-growing effect. There is the velocity grows and grows.
Positive feedback.
Feedback, yeah. This is even a word which we use in German, in English German. Feedback, positive feedback. Yeah. When we ask for other examples of positive feedback, there is one which I already showed a little bit just now. In acoustics, there's a microphone, there is a loudspeaker, yeah, this is a loudspeaker, and everybody knows if the microphone is coming too close in front of the loudspeaker, it is a terrible noise. Why? This what is given into the microphone comes out of the loudspeaker by an amplifier, through an amplifier, loudspeaker, and if this which comes out here is going in the next round, then it is again amplified. This is the effect of positive feedback. Yeah. But we all know to hear such kind of effect does not feel positive. It is terrible. Yeah, it starts here, and everybody says, "Stop! Stop! Stop! Feedback! Yeah, take the microphone away, turn the amplifier down," and things like that. Yeah. But the same principle, not being heard, is happening with the compound interest system in the world financial system and economy. Isn't it amazing? Okay, who has interest that this continues? Those who have money, and not only money to spend it for consuming, but who have surplus money. And money which can be put on to capital market to get an interest or profit or whatever. There is an interest. So this line here is the line for those who hold monetary assets. Monetary assets. In which form it may be, monetary assets. So, how should this be possible? That those monetary assets grow and grow even ever faster? How should this be possible? If this money is put on an account in the bank, a commercial bank. And the commercial bank lends this money to a corporation, for example. Then the corporation has to service this debt. The corporation is the debitor. And this is, in general, what the corporation or the debitor is paying, an interest fee and interest charge. This is a burden, interest burden. This flows through the bank to those who hold the monetary assets. And therefore it is important to become conscious about this context, about this connection, that the growth of monetary assets is only possible on the basis of a growth of debt. These two aspects are connected and not to be separated. And the amazing thing is that many people know about this. Many people, meanwhile, already know about the growing debt, not only in economy or for the corporations, but only for the private households, only for the state budget, everywhere. And in bigger context for whole countries, long time, specifically the countries in the third world, but meanwhile we all also hear and read about a threatening bankruptcy of state. Greece, for example. In the European context, this issue comes up to the surface and into the reality that whole states and state budgets are threatened by bankruptcy. And therefore it is an issue which is discussed and which has many consequences, but the connection between this and that usually is not seen. Not even by the economic experts, by the professors of economy, for example. It is not emphasized in the textbooks, in the study of economics around the world. This is very strange. But we should keep this in mind, and we should focus on this context, which obviously builds up a tension which has to grow more and more. And this tension must lead to very intensive Entladung. Discharge, yeah. There's some kind of charge and tension, and it must lead to very dramatic discharge. If it's not reduced, the tension not reduced on the way to this, or if the deeper root is not changed fundamentally. At the moment, this is unclear what kind of discharges it may be. But there must be some discharges, dramatic discharges. So I want to continue this view. Over the 15 years, it would be better that it's the same axis, but we can imagine, okay, this is a little bit condensed, and this x is stretched. And now at first I have to add another aspect into the first graph. before I come to this. Because this debt here is connected and leads to a growing interest burden for the debitors, whatever or whoever the debitors may be. It leads to growing interest burden. Interest burden. Interest burden. So one can say, what's the problem? Those who take credit, they can, for example, invest the money, investment, they can produce more goods and services, they can sell, then they have a sales income, and from this they can repay the credit, and they can pay the interest burden. This is correct for individual debitors. Some of them, they may manage it, and they may be successful, and they may even, in the effect, have some kind of profit out of it, even after paying the interest burden. But if one thinks in the total context of a national or even world society and economy and financial system, this would mean, on the average, the debitors have to pay more and more interest burden. And here it seems to be very small compared with this amount. This is because this amount is an accumulation over several decades, and this amount is what is to be paid each year. And in comparison, this seems to be not so much. But per year it has to be paid, and it has to come from anywhere. So to emphasize this development, I put it now in this graph and show it a little bit more with a stretched axis here. So these are the interest burdens on a whole economy. Debitors as the companies or corporations, debitors, private households, debitors as the state. Well, if the debitors manage to produce and to sell, the companies for example, enough, then it may be possible without problems, without big problems, to pay this interest burden. This is only very rough in tendency here in this graph. This should be the national product of one nation, of one country, or in the whole, it would be the product, the social product of the world economic system. This should grow similar as the interest burden grow, within so-called exponential growth. Wow, we know a lot of people and experts who say we need growth, economic growth. It's everywhere around the world. The solution, the means of solution of problems is economic growth and more economic growth. Yeah, this is possible for some period in Germany, in Western Germany specifically, after World War II, and starting early 15th or short before. There were really periods which were called the miracle, economic miracle, das Wirtschaftswunder, with growth rates quite amazingly. But these were very specific aspects and specific reasons. After a war, there's a big lot to be rebuilt, and there's a big need for more consume, and so on. But even in this, with the background of this Wirtschaftswunder, this economic miracle, it didn't last infinitely. At the end of the 60s, we had in Western Germany the first recession, economic recession, so it didn't grow anymore. Well, then they developed some specific kind of economic policy, which is called Keynesianism, some stimulus, yeah, with money which is brought by the state into the economic circulation. And then, whoa, yeah, it really worked. And everybody thought, now we have the means to fight against such recession and economic crisis, and in future to avoid it, to prevent it. But as we all know, this was an illusion. Obviously, it was an illusion. It is similar to a stimulus for a very depressed person, yeah, who now goes to a doctor, and the doctor, there were some doctors, they say you are totally sane, healthy, yeah? I can't find anything, you are healthy. But the person suffered. And so there were also economic theories and schools of economic theories who long time, the so-called classical and neoclassical economics, they told a market economy cannot get into deep crisis. Yeah, it is healthy by its fundament, but then there came a big crisis. And yeah, if then for the individual depressed person the stimulus is given, it works for some time, but after a while he falls back into depression. And then the next stimulus is not the same result. It is less usually. Wow, no problem, we take 2 of these. Yeah. What I show with this example is there's a tendency to addiction. Yeah? The patient becomes addicted from this kind of stimulus. And this is a problem in the long run, because it produces more and more so-called Nebenwirkungen in German.
Side effects.
Side effects, yes. But the side effects will become more and more severe and serious. And this is not really a solution. And the side effects of Keynesianism